welcome to Human Monsters. Before I begin, I'd just like to send out a shout out to those of you who are listening from Denmark. I looked at my statistics and it shows that Danes account for part of the top 10 listeners of this show. I hope Human Monsters is part of your hygge routine. That's right, I know about hygge. Now enjoy the show, which is about a woman from Denmark. The following is adapted from the memoir Anger is My Middle Name, a memoir by Lisbeth Zornig Andersen. 1968 to 1971, Denmark. This is Jan. He's going to be your father now. We're driving to Koga, where he has a nice big house we're all going to live in. Elizabeth's mother broke this news to her shortly after she was returned from an orphanage. Lisbeth and her siblings had been shuffled back and forth from their family's house, which was owned by her grandparents, to an orphanage. Her father was a drinker, and his marriage to their mother was tumultuous, replete with physical abuse. No matter how you sliced it, it was not sustainable. And now her mother had found somebody else to be dysfunctional with, apparently. 1971 to 1972. Lisbeth's mother filled her in on the background of her relations with Jan. They met through a personals ad while she went father shopping. Lisbeth and her 3 siblings slept in the new lodgings, 2 to a bunk bed. Her mother told her that all 4 children would start afresh at a new school and that their new house had a garden. Jan was a bricklayer by profession, though he didn't actually do any work. He had big lamb chop sideburns, though it was the 70s, so you can't hold that against him. He always looked like he was scowling. When he was drunk, the scowling was even more pronounced. The menace was real and sincere. He had many rules for the children to follow, and if they were not adhered to, they would incur his wrath. One punishment was to have one's pants pulled down so that he could put them across his lap and spank their bare buttocks. One rule is that nobody was allowed to talk while they're eating. Their mother and Jan don't talk either at the dinner table. The only sound permitted beside the clinking of cutlery on dishes was the television. Jan decided what everybody got to eat. Whatever the portion sizes, he insisted they eat every last crumb, down to the final strand of mitochondrial DNA. Otherwise, they'd be punished and sent off to bed. They would eat what they didn't finish at the next meal. The kids negotiated with one another about who should take the hit when Jan became aware that a transgression had been committed, when he was in the dark about who had committed the act. Lisbeth's sister, Renee, is quick to rat out her siblings to save her own hide. She would have lasted about a half hour in prison. Due to Renee's disloyalty, Lisbeth's brother, 7-year-old Tawny, took a lengthy spanking after Jan pulled him by his hair into the house. Tawny stole 5 kroner from Jan to buy a bag of candy. He took the candy back to the store. Jan needed the money to go to the government's employment center to apply for unemployment benefits. Though Jan would beat the children for making too much noise, when he was drunk, he would dance to music with them, such as the chaos of a dysfunctional household. Lisbeth only found out that her mother and Jan were married while leafing through a photo album. They eloped while the children were left with relatives for a few days. Jan, Lisbeth's mother, and the children moved into a town called Lulland so that Jan could find work. 1972 to 1974. The new house has little in the way of indoor plumbing. No bathroom, no hot water on tap. It's about this time that Lisbeth learns about sex via her mother and Jan. They have loud sex that the children cannot ignore. One of her brothers discovers pornographic magazines in their room, which Lisbeth has been shown by one of her brothers. She hasn't seen it on film, but she didn't need to when it came to the mechanics of sexual intercourse. Jan and her mother would do it with the damn door open. The same day that Jan punished Tommy for having a bowel movement outdoors against a tree by making him pick up the feces with his bare hands, the parental figures are fighting, even more so than usual. Jan is more mean-spirited than usual, while her mother taunts him about being a coward who can't get a job. They're both drunk, so such a dialogue flows easily. Suddenly, Jan grabbed Lisbeth's mother by the throat. She tries to kick and punch herself free, but Jan's grip is like iron. When he finally releases her, she falls over onto a coffee table. She gasped for breath. Jan left the house and drove away on his moped. As Lisbeth's brothers help their mother up, she curses Jan, calling him a psychopath. Once the dust has settled, Tawny said, in reference to the fecal matter outdoors, "I'm not the one who did it." Renee broke into laughter, saying, "No, it was me, but you gave up first." Jan returned the next morning. To prevent any bedwetting or getting up to go to the outhouse, Jan institutes a new rule forbidding any of the kids from drinking water at night. When Tawny asks his mother for some water one night, Jan forces him to drink water until he throws up. Jan and Lisbeth's mother start drinking again after a dry spell. One night they got into a heated argument, which led to a physical confrontation. At one point, Jan threatened to go outside, take up an axe, and kill everyone. Her mother opened a window, and all the kids jumped out, followed by her. They went to the home of a friend of hers. Lisbeth was frightened as they made their way over in the pitch dark, frightened that Jan would chase them with the axe, like Jack Nicholson in The Shining. When they returned to the home they shared with Jan, he had bandages all over his hands. When Lisbeth asked him what happened, he said he attempted suicide by slitting his wrists. He said he was tired of life, Lisbeth's mother, and the kids. Lisbeth found it harder to sleep from that point onwards because of her fear that someone in the house would die. 1975 to 1977. Lisbeth and her siblings get to know a neighbor named Mogan's. He informs them that he has some kittens that were just born, and he will eventually be giving away. They are too young to be picked up, but he tells the children they can go and look at them any time before they are taken to new homes. One day, Mogan's prepares refreshments for the kids to consume after looking at the kittens in his barn. Lisbeth details how this went down. Inside, Mogan's has set out sodas and a large plate with sandwiches and a big blue plastic tub of strawberry jam on the table in the living room. While sitting on Mogan's lap, I eat till I'm ready to burst. I unbutton the top of my pants because my stomach hurts from eating too much. He puts his hand on the lowest part of my stomach, with his fingertips inside the top of my panties, while he slowly moves his fingers back and forth. My brothers can see what he's doing with his hand. I think it feels nice to have a warm hand there. On other visits, her siblings are always playing outside. Lisbeth always stays indoors with Mogans. As she tells it, what I like best is sitting on his lap and talking. My pants or shorts are always open, and he usually has his hand in my panties, so that his fingertips are gently touching the top of my pee-pee. Whenever he hears the boys come in, he quickly pulls out his hand. One day I tell him I have to pee and hop off his lap. He says he wants to help me, so we go to the bathroom together. It's dirty, but not half as dirty as our outhouse. I pull down my shorts and sit on the toilet. Mogans crouches down in front of me, pulls my pants and underpants all the way down to the floor, and spreads my legs a little more. He sticks one of his index fingers between my thighs, inside my pee-pee, and slowly moves it back and forth. He's breathing heavy as he asks if I like it. Yes, I say, though I'm not sure what he means. I sit quietly waiting for him to stop, but he keeps doing it. Finally, I tell him I can't pee when he does that and when he's in the room. Then he stops and says he'll be waiting up right outside the door and that I can call after I've peed so he can help me with my pants. I walk out. Mogans, who's standing right by the door, looks disappointed. You were supposed to call, he says. Yeah, but I could pull up my own pants, I say, as I walk by him. He grabs my arms and says he wants to tickle me. He carries me over to the bed, where he throws me down and then sits on top of me while tickling me. I squeal with laughter. He keeps doing it until finally, out of breath, he tosses himself onto the bed next to me. He says he wants to show me something that will tickle in a different way. He sits up, pushes himself farther down the bed, and lies down again with his lips against my thighs. He starts kissing them carefully while I chuckle. Then I can feel his tongue up under my shorts, which he's trying to push up with one hand. I lie completely stiff. It feels nice. Suddenly someone is pounding on the window, and I hear loud laughter from outside. My brothers have been standing there, watching what we're doing. Mogans jumps up, straightens out his clothes, and says that we have to go home now. I stand up and, confused, race out into the courtyard. Mogan shuts the door behind me before I even get to say goodbye. My brothers say they saw him touching me, and now they're going to tell Mom and Jan about it. I feel ashamed, and I'm afraid Jan will punish me for it. When the kids returned home, Michael told their parents that Mogans had fondled Lisbeth. They told the kids they could not visit there anymore. Jan and her mother discussed reporting the incident to the police. Jan assumed the police won't react, and that a better solution would be to inform as many citizens as possible. Mogans eventually moved away. There was another physical altercation between Jan and her mother, or at least a significant one. They were happening quite frequently. He grabbed her by the hair and threw her out of the pub where they were drinking. When Lisbeth joined her outside, her gym teacher, Greta, happened to come along. Lisbeth begged her to take her with her. Lisbeth's mother didn't object. She said, "Take the little bastard with you. Greta took Lisbeth's hand and they walked away. 1977 to 1978. Lisbeth lives with Greta and her husband Otto for about 6 months. Lisbeth sees her mother once during that time. It doesn't take Greta long to see that the home Lisbeth shared with her mother, Jan, and her siblings was not suitable for children. It was a cluttered and filthy pigsty. Lisbeth didn't have suitable clothing for that matter, and there appeared to be cigarette burns on her arms. One day, a social worker accompanied by a police officer showed up at Greta's house and took Lisbeth to an orphanage. Unbeknownst to her at the time, her teachers signed a letter stating that Greta and Otto's home was a more suitable residence for Lisbeth. Jan and Lisbeth's mother are finally divorced. Lisbeth's brothers don't live with her mother. Lisbeth and her mother move into a row house. Despite the divorce, Jan still visits. Her mother must have found single motherhood more than she could take, for one day she beat Michael with a coat hanger with such brutality he retreated to the floor. Afterwards, she locked him out of the house. He wasn't admitted back in for a few hours. It is about this time that Lisbeth's mother's emotional and neurological health went into decline. When she wasn't having seizures, she was threatening to commit suicide. Either way, the children were frequently left unnerved by the ways in which she presented. The latter occurs mostly while Jan is around and she's drunk. She would say she was going to slit her wrists. Her backup plan was to turn on the gas in the oven and inhale it unto her death. Jan just laughs and says that that'll be the day when he finally gets some peace. Lisbeth didn't laugh at all. She took it seriously and removed all the razor blades and knives from the household to prevent it from happening. When her mother asked her where the knives were, Lisbeth was honest, telling her that she hid them so that she wouldn't kill herself. She then told her she couldn't remember where she put them. Her mother would replace the set. Lisbeth sleeps in the same bed with her mother, and that includes the nights when Jan sleeps over. Jan and her mother have sex while Lisbeth is lying there, bouncing up and down as they go at it. One night Lisbeth says to them, "What are you doing?" Jan said, "We're doing something that feels really good. Try touching your privates so you can see how nice it feels." Lisbeth tried it, but didn't care for the sensation. Unfortunately, she enjoyed it more when Mogans molested her. Her mother and Jan resumed their lovemaking session, and somehow Lisbeth fell asleep. Lisbeth was 10 years old when Jan and her mother offered her some cherry wine. They enticed her into drinking it by telling her it's sweet and will make her feel nice and relaxed throughout her body. Lisbeth said, "Okay." She sat down with them. Lisbeth wasn't crazy about it, but she drank all her portion. Jan gave her a refill. After the second helping, Lisbeth began to feel a body buzz. Jan gave her another refill. He looked excited as Lisbeth began to feel drunk. Her mother looked at her nervously. Jan was in a good mood for a change. Lisbeth got up. She sang and danced to the music on the stereo. Jan joined her. Out of the blue, he says, "Well, it's about time to go to bed. Lisbeth, why don't you take a bath before you go to bed?" After Lisbeth bathed and dressed in clean underclothes, she went to bed. As Lisbeth lay in bed, pretending to be asleep, Jan and her mother came in and removed their clothes. They crawled in under the duvet. They started having sex, but suddenly it stopped, and silence befell the room. The duvet was pulled off Lisbeth. She described how it went down from there. Jan crawls down to the end of the bed. He pulls off my panties, spreads my legs, and lies down between them. I don't resist. He starts gently moving his tongue around in my privates while caressing my thighs. At one point, he lies across the bed so he can stick his penis inside Mom while he continues moving his tongue around. I can't hear Mom's breathing, only Jan's, which gets louder and louder. Suddenly, he moves away, gets up on his knees, grabs Mom's rear end, and lifts her up on all fours. He pumps hard into her, back and forth, while roaring loudly. Afterward, he plops down in the middle of the bed and falls asleep in a few seconds. Lisbeth lied with her back facing Jan and her mother. She tried to sleep, but there was just no way. She couldn't find her panties, and she didn't want to risk waking them up by turning on the light to search for them, so she just went to sleep. The following day, everybody acts like nothing untoward went on the previous night. Without being told, Lisbeth knew that what went down was wrong, and she felt ashamed that she didn't resist it. 1970 to 1980. Jan's sexual abuse of Lisbeth continues. As she tells it, Jan and Mom are still having wild sex at night when they go to bed, and more frequently, Jan pulls off my comforter in the dark and crawls down between my legs first. Once he reaches a certain point, he moved over to Mom, and they have sex while I turn my back to them. One night, when Mom has to go pee in the middle of everything, Jan stands up and tells me to sit on the edge of the bed. He grabs his penis, which is stiff, and moves it around my privates, without sticking it in, all the while staring at me. I look away. "Do you like that?" he asks, breathing heavily. I don't respond. He keeps doing it while getting closer to my hole, so that his penis almost goes in. It doesn't hurt. "Jite," he yells, calling for my mother. "Come and look at this." Mom comes back in and looks terrified. "Be careful. If you do that, it could be evidence." He pulls back quickly, and I say I have to pee. When I come back, Mom and Jan are yelling at each other in the living room. Mom says, "I'm going to fucking turn you into the police, you pervert." Jan roars with laughter. They can't prove anything, and they sure as hell won't listen to you. Anyway, you've been part of it too. 1980 to 1981. In February 1980, Lisbeth turned 12. Fleeing from the chaos of her home, Lisbeth was put in touch with a social worker who arranged for her to be housed in an orphanage. It seemed that the most troubling aspect of her home life did not elude her at the orphanage either. She described an experience she had with one of the other kids. "Suddenly I wake up with a start. Someone is in my room. It's Stieg, sitting in his underpants at my desk and staring at me. I look over at the door and see that it's completely closed now. He says I mustn't be afraid. I just have to lie still and it will go fast. I'm terrified. He pulls down my comforter and my underpants and then pulls down his own. He tries to stick a finger in me, but I say ouch so loudly that he jumps. He lies between my legs and starts licking me while he masturbates. He ejaculates immediately, almost without a sound. And then he stands up, pulls up his underpants, and dries off his finger on my comforter. He looks down at me and says, "Fuck, you taste like shit, and keep your mouth shut about it." Then he leaves, closing the door behind him. After he left, she dragged her desk over to the door and left it there so no one else could get in. Losing her virginity to a male peer didn't go as Lisbeth would have likely wanted it to. After losing track of a boy she danced with and kissed at a party, another boy offered to help her find him. As she tells it, "A long time passes, at least half an hour. Now I'm looking for both Jens and Darius, but I don't see any signs of either of them. It's no fun anymore." A thin, black-haired guy in worn, dark clothes that seem a little too big for him comes over and asks who I'm looking for. "Jens," I say. "Do you know him?" "Oh yeah, Jens is one of my friends," he replied. The guy seems to be in his early 20s. He says he just saw Jens outside and suggests we go out to look for him. We walk out together into the darkness. He points to a small cluster of trees and bushes and says that's where he last saw him. "Come," he says, taking my hand. I don't like holding his hand. What if Jens sees me? "Come on," he says, laughing as he pulls me away. Where he takes me is dark and deserted, and I soon realize what's about to happen. He throws me down on the ground and puts his hand over my mouth while fumbling with his own pants and mine. I say no between his fingers, but he answers that I came on to him first and shouldn't act all high and mighty now. I stop resisting. It's true, I foolishly went with him, and this is the price for my stupidity. My heart is pounding. I'm afraid he might kill me. If I just lie still, he tears off my jeans and shoves hard into me, thrusting again and again, until he groans heavily and falls down on top of me, his mouth against my cheek. His breath is sour and hot, and I feel as if I'm going to vomit. My crotch is burning, and I'm crying silently from the pain. I stare up at the sky and count the stars, struggling to create systems out of them. A moment later, he stands up, pulls on his pants, and runs off. I lie on the ground for a little while, with dirt and branches in my hair and clothes. I look for my pants, but they're lying so far away that my hand can't reach them. I walk over to get my jeans and panties. My crotch and my abdomen are both sore. I dare not go back into the party. A psychologist working for the orphanage profiled Lisbeth. He observed that she was functioning normally and demonstrated herself to be highly gifted. However, he also found that she was at risk for developing a neurosis due to serious and chronic neglect. To quote the psychologist, Lisbeth is aware of, desires, and is capable of entering into emotionally close and lasting relationships. But up until now, she seems to have experienced human relationships as superficial, unstable, exploitative, and often violent and aggressive, especially those between men and women. It's high time to ensure that Lisbeth's potential for personal development isn't crushed in a typical pattern of neurosis, especially since puberty, with its physical and mental upheavals, is imminent. Lasting placement with a foster family would best serve Lisbeth's interests. The orphanage did not appear to agree with every aspect of that report, for the staff would not place her with a foster family. Most likely it was because she had been acting out, which often manifested in hostility, which occasionally ended with heated confrontations and vandalism. 1983 to 1984. It can be difficult to open up about abuse. Lisbeth was encouraged by her therapist, Karen, to do so. Lisbeth was a teenager now and had repressed her thoughts and feelings about what she went through as a child for many years. Now she would begin her healing journey, as Lisbeth put it. I can't hold back the tears any longer. I cry as I try to tell her about Jan and Mom's assaults on me in Torrig. I could tell her about so many other terrible experiences, but that's the one I land on. I describe in detail what happened, what was said at the time, how often it happened, and that they were both there, although Mom clearly doesn't want to be. She just couldn't refuse. She couldn't protect me. I tell her about Mom saying Jan should make sure no one could tell. I felt as if my words would mean nothing. Only physical evidence would. I sob, my head against her shoulder. I can't see Karen's face, and I don't want to. I don't want her to be frightened. She holds me until my sobbing turns into sniffling, and I'm overcome with exhaustion. Something I almost never feel. Reflecting on other sessions, Lisbeth says, Karen and I continue our weekly discussions, which I really look forward to. We leave no stone unturned. We talk a lot about my time at the orphanage in Noxkov, especially the loneliness I felt and my inability to say what was wrong. All I could do was act up and feel bad about it. Instead of trying to find out why I was misbehaving, they simply told me to change my behavior and not take advantage of Mom, who was having a hard time. Reflecting on the hardest years of her life, Lisbeth wrote, I often say I'm reasonably disturbed in many areas because of my upbringing. For example, I continue to struggle with having faith in others. I always have one foot out the door, an escape route. Yet, Michael and I have been together for 12 years now and married for 5 of them. Last summer, we moved in together. We did so with great trepidation, but I love every minute we're together. And I feel secure, which is a giant step forward for me. There's one thing I know I'm good at, and that's raising children. I have a large brood of strong, healthy, and unique children, all of whom have gotten at least one of my character traits. Several of my acquaintances have commented on it. My children have asked me several times why they aren't named Zornig, like me. I tell them I didn't want to pass on the legacy of that name. I needed the name. I had to use that anger to liberate myself from my own personal inheritance. Born into light and love, my children don't need that anger. The following data is derived from the Child Sexual Abuse Fact Sheet issued by the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. For parents, teachers, and other caregivers, what is child sexual abuse? Child sexual abuse is any interaction between a child and an adult or another child in which the child is used for the sexual stimulation of the perpetrator or an observer. Sexual abuse can include both touching and non-touching behaviors. Touching behaviors may involve touching of the vagina, penis, breasts, or buttocks, oral genital contact, or sexual intercourse. Non-touching behaviors can include voyeurism, trying to look at a child's naked body, exhibitionism, or exposing the child to pornography. Abusers often do not use physical force, but may use play, deception, threats, or other forms of coercion to engage children and maintain their silence. Abusers frequently employ persuasive and manipulative tactics to keep the child engaged. These tactics, referred to as grooming, may include buying gifts or arranging special activities, which can further confuse the victim. Who is sexually abused? Children of all ages, races, ethnicities, and economic backgrounds are vulnerable to sexual abuse. Child sexual abuse affects both girls and boys in all kinds of neighborhoods and communities and in countries around the world. How can you tell if a child is being or has been sexually abused? Children who have been sexually abused may display a range of emotional and behavioral reactions, many of which are characteristic of children who have experienced other types of trauma. These reactions include an increase in nightmares and/or other sleeping difficulties, withdrawn behavior, angry outbursts, anxiety, depression, not wanting to be left alone with a particular individual or individuals, sexual knowledge, language, and/or behavior that are inappropriate for the child's age. Although many children who have experienced sexual abuse show behavioral and emotional changes, many others do not. It is therefore critical to focus not only on detection, but on prevention and communication by teaching children about body safety and healthy body boundaries, and by encouraging open communication about sexual matters. Why don't children tell about sexual abuse? There are many reasons children do not disclose being sexually abused, including threats of bodily harm to the child and/or the child's family, fear of being removed from the home, fear of not being believed, shame or guilt. If the abuser is someone the child or the family cares about, the child may worry about getting that person in trouble. In addition, children often believe that the sexual abuse was their own fault and may not disclose for fear of getting in trouble themselves. Very young children may not have the language skills to communicate about the abuse, or may not understand that the actions of the perpetrator are abusive, particularly if the sexual abuse is made into a game. What can you do if a child discloses that he or she is being or has been sexually abused? If a child discloses abuse, it is critical to stay calm, listen carefully, and never blame the child. Thank the child for telling you and reassure him or her of your support. Please remember to call for help immediately. Child sexual abuse, myths, and facts. Myth: child sexual abuse is a rare experience. Fact: child sexual abuse is not rare. Retrospective research indicates that as many as 1 out of 4 girls and 1 out of 6 boys will experience some form of sexual abuse before the age of 18. However, because child sexual abuse is by its very nature secretive, many of these cases are never reported. Myth: a child is most likely to be sexually abused by a stranger. Fact: children are most often sexually abused by someone they know and trust. Approximately 3/4 of reported cases of child sexual abuse are committed by family members or other individuals who are considered part of the victim's circle of trust. Myth: preschoolers do not need to know about child sexual abuse and would be frightened if educated about it. Fact: numerous educational programs are available to teach young children about body safety skills and the difference between okay and not okay touches. These programs can help children develop basic safety skills in a way that is helpful rather than frightening. For more information on educating young children, see Let's Talk About Taking Care of You, an educational book about body safety for young children, available at www.hope_talk_book_information.html. Myth: children who are sexually abused will never recover. Fact: many children are quite resilient, and with a combination of effective counseling and support from their parents or caregivers, children can and do recover from such experiences. Myth: child sexual abuse is always perpetrated by adults. Fact: 23% of reported cases of child sexual abuse are perpetrated by individuals under the age of 18. While some degree of sexual curiosity and exploration is to be expected between children of about the same age, when one child coerces another to engage in adult-like sexual activities, the behavior is unhealthy and abusive. Both the abuser and the victim can benefit from counseling. Myth: talking about sexual abuse with a child who has suffered such an experience will only make it worse. Fact: although children often choose not to talk about their abuse, there is no evidence that encouraging children to talk about sexual abuse will make them feel worse. On the contrary, treatment from a mental health professional can minimize the physical, emotional, and social problems of these children by allowing them to process their feelings and fears related to the abuse. Tips to protect children from sexual abuse. Teach children accurate names of private body parts. Avoid focusing exclusively on stranger danger. Keep in mind that most children are abused by someone they know and trust. Teach children about body safety and the difference between okay and not okay touches. Let children know that they have the right to make decisions about their bodies. Empower them to say no when they do not want to be touched, even in non-sexual ways. Example, politely refusing hugs, and to say no to touching others. Make sure children know that adults and older children never need help with their private body parts. Example, bathing or going to the bathroom. Teach children to take care of their own private parts, i.e. bathing, wiping after bathroom use, so they don't have to rely on adults or older children for help. Educate children about the difference between good secrets, like surprise parties, which are okay because they are not kept secret for long, and bad secrets, those that the child is supposed to keep secret forever, which are not okay. Trust your instincts. If you feel uneasy about leaving a child with someone, don't do it. If you're concerned about possible sexual abuse, ask questions. The best time to talk to your child about sexual abuse is now. Child-on-child sexual abuse is a topic that doesn't get quite as much exposure as other forms of sexual abuse. The following is a list of 10 facts about child-on-child sexual abuse by Katie Morton.
Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about child-on-child sexual abuse because it's not often talked about and there are so many issues and misconceptions out there. which is why today I want to offer 10 must-know facts, from shame to abuse cycles and trauma to parental response and so much more. And really quickly on the topic of trauma, I want to remind you that my new book, Traumatize, is available now. In it, I talk about what trauma is, how it can feel, and of course, how we can heal from it. You can order your copy today by clicking the link in the description or find it wherever books are sold. Unfortunately, children abuse other children. This could be because they themselves are being sexually abused by someone or have viewed sexually explicit materials and are acting out at what they saw. This isn't commonly talked about because it can be hard to imagine it happening, and even harder to view a child as a perpetrator. But it is very common, and therefore it's important that we discuss it, which is why I'm going to explain the 10 must-know facts about it. So let's get into it.
And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Right?
It's the thing that sucks about it is, because I've been deep in it for like a couple of, I don't know, probably like a month now, I guess, reading, is that because it's a child, it's not like it's their fault, but it is. So the people who are abused by another child, like I had a patient years ago who was abused by another boy, and like it fucks with your head because you can't put them in jail because they're hurt too, but then like you're hurt. It's so... The first fact is that child-on-child sexual abuse is abuse. It can have the same effects on us as any other kind of abuse. And the reason for that is regardless of the perpetrator's age, what happened to us was a sexual act that should not have happened to a child our age. That can be overwhelming to our system and cause confusion, shame, guilt, embarrassment. It is a trauma, and we will need to heal from it just as we would from any other trauma. An analogy that was shared with me to further explain this fact is that a kid can accidentally shoot another kid with a gun. Regardless of whether they are old enough to understand the permanence of death or what a gun can actually do when fired, the other child has still been shot and suffers all the same effects. Now, I know that that may sound intense and that analogy might be a little overwhelming, but it does a good job of explaining why child-on-child sexual abuse is abuse. And before we get into it any further, I do want to define this term, child-on-child sexual abuse, because many struggle to understand what's normal sexual development in children and what's problematic sexual behavior. What's normal is based on what's age appropriate for the child. So normal sexual exploration for young kids is more about curiosity around their own or others' body parts and how they work. And if they involve another kid, no one really feels pressured or forced to participate. Normal behavior for preteens would include starting to masturbate privately, and they might have romantic relationships that include things like consensual hugging and kissing with other kids at the same levels of maturity. It's normal for other older teens to have relationships with each other that might or might not include sex, as long as it's consensual. Now, problematic sexual behaviors in children and adolescents are those that are unusual for that age group and occur in situations where there's significant age, power, or developmental differences. And they tend to be coercive, secretive, or excessive. Does that make sense? And
Yes.
that was just a lot to run through. The second fact is that the age of the perpetrator isn't the only important or defining factor. In many cases of child-on-child sexual abuse, the one doing the abusive things isn't much older or even is possibly younger than the victim. So even if, for example, you were 8 and your abuser was 6, that doesn't mean that it couldn't be abuse. The truth is, knowing about sex can be what gives them power, not just age, size, or strength. Also, it doesn't matter what sex the child who initiated the abuse was, or whether they used threats or violence. Whether or not there was force is not the only factor in whether something was abuse or not. We can all be manipulated or coerced into doing things, especially when we're children. Not to mention that we don't often understand consent, or are too young to even give it. So even if we agreed to participate, that doesn't mean we wanted it or even understood what was happening. And I know that shame comes along with that, and abuse tries to tell us that, we should have fought back harder or known better. But the truth is, we were a child too. And we might not have known that what was happening was abusive or how to get out of the situation. And don't worry, I will be digging into shame in the next fact and in fact 7, so stick around for more about that. The third fact is parents and other adults don't often know what to say or do about it. The discomfort parents can have with sex and talking about sex with their children lets those of us who are in pain down. And it's important that when a child comes to us telling us that someone has hurt them or touched them in their private places, that we believe them. Too often, parents and other adults will just chalk it up to kids being curious and experimenting, or decide to never talk about it again. Those responses only compound the shame we already feel about what happened to us. And don't worry, I'm going to talk a lot more about that a little later in this video. But those responses, or lack of them, feed into the false beliefs that it wasn't that big of a deal, or it wasn't actually abuse, and we're just overreacting. Or that we brought it on ourselves and are to blame for what happened to us. As parents and responsible adults, we need to do better. And I will dig into some of those ways that we can better support and help our children heal in the next few facts, so stay tuned. Fact number 4 is that talking about this will help. I've heard from parents that they worry if they make too big of a deal about the abuse, that it will only make it worse for the child. And they just want their pain to go away, so they stop talking about it altogether. But talking about it openly and honestly will actually do the opposite. And no, I don't mean, sharing all of our own adult reactions with our child, but being open to conversations with them about what happened and how they feel is really important. And being aware of things like shame and guilt popping up can really help. For example, when our child tells us something happened, we show worry, care, and concern, and let them know that they can tell us about what happened and we'll keep them safe. And do your best to not react with upset or disgust, okay? Much of what children need in times like this is to feel heard, understood, and most importantly, protected from any further pain. If we try and sweep the issue under the rug, our child won't feel any of those things, and instead will most likely blame themselves for what happened. So please, when it is brought up, manage any of your own discomfort and give your child the room needed to speak about it. And don't drop the subject after one conversation. Keep checking in and let them know that you're there to help if more comes up. It's the best way to help them in their healing process. Which rolls nicely into fact number 5. Getting our child into therapy right away is best. Now, I know many parents and children can worry what will happen if we tell a therapist or other professional about the abuse. And don't worry, I will dig deeper into that process in fact number 9, so stay tuned for that. But therapy is important because we can heal from these traumatic events, which I also touch on later in this video, but we know that the sooner we are able to talk through and process a trauma, the less likely it is to be stuffed down and develop into PTSD or other mental illnesses, things like depression, anxiety, or even borderline personality disorder. Make sure you talk with your child about this, letting them know that you want them to find someone they're comfortable talking with. Offer to sit in on a session or 2 if they want, and while making sure they do go to therapy, let them guide the rest of the process. We don't want to take away any more of their power or confidence, but we do want to make sure that they get the help that they so desperately need. Also, as a patient, know that therapists do tell parents some things said in therapy if we're under 18 years old. So it's best to ask them what will be kept between you two and what will be shared. That way there aren't any surprises or trust broken if the therapist needs to tell your parents something that you said. Overall, the sooner we get in to see someone and start talking through the abuse, the better. And if possible, find a therapist who is trauma-informed. The 6th fact is that shame and disgust can come along with this type of abuse, or really any type of abuse. But when we are harmed by another child, it can be hard for us to understand what happened and think that we must have done something to cause this. When we're young and don't have all of the information or understanding about a situation, we use what we do know to try and make sense of it. And what we usually know the most about is ourselves and our role in what took place, meaning that we are likely to blame ourselves for the abuse and for not knowing better or saying no. Most of us might have even felt shame because some of what happened could have felt good to our bodies. Or we might have even had an orgasm, which is common in sexual abuse because that's just how our body parts are designed to work. We can think that something must be wrong with us to let that happen, and we can start to doubt ourselves or who we are and what we're capable of. Not to mention that if we are finally coming to terms with this as an adult, it can disgust us that this happened to us at such a young age. We can struggle to even talk about all that happened because we realize now just how adult those abusive actions were, and it can be a lot to process. Moving right on to fact number 7. Hypersexuality is often a result of childhood sexual abuse. And this can happen when we are abused by an adult or another child. Because when we are sexualized from a young age, meaning before we would naturally be interested in it, we can find ourselves masturbating, but not knowing why we're doing it or even what we're really doing, or even engaging in other sexual acts. And while I know this can sound odd, we can do this as a way to process what happened and try to make sense of it. Kind of like if we repeat the behavior enough, we will understand it better and it will stop being so upsetting, which can cause us to engage in sexual behaviors following the abuse. It has nothing to do with our feelings about it or what we like and don't like. Many of my patients and viewers have also talked about how the abuse affected their sexuality long term, and how many went through years of being sexually promiscuous as a way of trying to take back the power and making their own decisions about sex, even if they maybe weren't the healthiest for them. Just know that all of this is perfectly normal and something that should be talked about and processed through in therapy as well. The 8th fact is, even though many children were first abused themselves, they are still responsible for the pain that they caused. It's often believed that children don't know what they're doing and therefore can't be held accountable. Sure, a child may be too young to really know what it was that they were doing, or maybe abuse happened to them, which I'll touch on in my next fact, but that doesn't make their actions any less hurtful to the child that they were doing it to. In general, it's safe to say that just because one person doesn't know what they are doing is hurtful doesn't make it any less so to the person they're doing it to. Does that make sense? We are all responsible for our actions, especially those that hurt other human beings. And we are all capable of abuse, no matter our age. Unfortunately, in many cases, but not all, children who abuse other children have first been abused themselves. The abuse that they endured explains why they did what they did. Remember that last fact about hypersexuality? That's what I'm talking about. But that only explains it, right? That doesn't excuse it. Just because we know why a child acted the way that they did doesn't mean that they didn't also cause harm. A child who harms another child needs treatment so that they can stop. Most children who have abused another child don't go on to become abusers as adults, and treatment helps make sure that that doesn't happen. Fact 9. If a mandated reporter, like a therapist or a teacher, finds out about the abuse, Child Protective Services will get involved and investigate. Now, this process is a bit confusing, so I will try my best to simplify it. And this is how it works in the US, but keep in mind that it may be different in other countries. So when your child tells me, as a therapist and a mandated reporter, that they were abused, I have to report this to CPS, or Child Protective Services. Now, this means that I will have to fill out a form with the child's name, address, what happened, and as much information as I can gather about the abuser, the other child, right? Their name, address, phone number, age, school they go to, etc. They will also ask if I think this is happening to other children, like if the child who initiated the problematic sexual acts is around a lot of kids and could have an opportunity to harm someone else. And yes, I know in this case we are talking about children who harm other children, so they're going to be around other kids, but I'm just walking you through the questions and what the protocol is. Then CPS will take the information that I gave to them and investigate. They will probably come by your home and speak with you and your spouse or partner, and they may want to speak to your child, the one who told the mandated reporter about it, or any other children in the house. If the child who initiated the problematic sexual acts doesn't live in the same household, they will do the same at that child's home. Then they will decide the next best action, meaning, does the child who initiated the problematic sexual acts need to be placed into a treatment center or taken to jail or juvenile detention center or other things like that? Overall, they just want to check to make sure that things are safe for the child who was abused and decide on best actions to take regarding the child initiating the problematic sexual acts. And finally, fact 10. We can heal from this abuse. I know a lot of what we talked about today could have been hard to take in and difficult to process, but know that getting in to see a therapist and working through the abuse you sustained is really best. I know it's tough and trauma work sucks, but with the right help, it can and will get better. What you experienced was abuse. It doesn't matter who did it or whether or not you were able to fight back, and you deserve to feel heard, understood, and validated as you work through to process it all. It can get better. You can heal. So please speak up, reach out, and get the help that you need and deserve.
Thank you for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.